Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are taking a look at the Flysimware Cessna 414 Chancellor. The aircraft has just released for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Technically it's still in early access, it's still in a beta state, and as a result Flysimware are currently offering a discount on the full purchase price of the product once it's fully released. Nonetheless, the Chancellor is now available for purchase, so I thought we'd take a look at the product, see what it has to offer. I suppose, arguably dependent on what we find here today, the Chancellor is going to be our real first study level twin within the sim. We do of course have the Coronado Seneca and Seminole, but they're fairly lightweight overall in terms of their flight and systems modelling. Anyway, despite the product still being in early access, we're going to be carrying out a full review for our flight today. Firstly, a little bit of a giveaway. The Cessna 414 is already done to a very nice standard. Secondly, the price is already very much up there with a typical full purchase price, so I think it deserves to be looked at like we would with any other add-on. Of course though, as we go we will be cognizant of the fact that it is still a beta release. Being a full review, we're going to carry out all of the usual items, so we'll be starting here on the ground taking a look at the external modelling and texturing. We'll then move internally and do the same there. We'll be carrying out a full flight from A to B with a cold and dark start all the way through to shutdown. We'll finish up the flight with a few manoeuvres, and then we'll move on at the end of the review to my overall thoughts and opinions on the product. We're currently on the ground at Kilo Golf Uniform Charlie, Gunnison Airport. We're going to be taking the aircraft over towards Grand Junction, which is Kilo Golf Juliet Tango. We'll be tracking via the Mike Tango Juliet, or the Montrose VOR, climbing up to 14,000 feet. It should act as a nice little test run here for the Cessna 414. Anyway guys, as always, if you do enjoy the video and find it to be of use, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you have any comments or questions for me, you can leave those down in the comments section below. Our flight's going to be departing out of Gunnison early morning, but we're going to try a little bit of a magic trick here. We're just going to adjust the time so that we've got a slightly better view of the external model of the aircraft, and we'll continue on with our tour. So, starting with an overall view of the Cessna 414, I think it's very fair to say that Flysimware have done an excellent job with the aircraft. You'll see throughout, but the level of attention to detail with the modelling is right up there with some of the very best developers in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Texturing is very solid throughout, again a very high standard achieved there. The rippled metal effect on the bodywork looks excellent, and the same for the PBR. Overall, in the right lighting conditions, the aircraft does look very photorealistic. Throughout the aircraft, it doesn't really matter where you look, the modelling standards are very much what you'd expect from a modern sim. For example, here at the aircraft tail you can see we've got all of the vortex generators there just before the rudder. All of the linkages there modelled quite nicely as well. We've even got the rudder lock modelled, and that's also operable via the onboard tablet. We'll talk more about that later on. But that provides a little sneak preview of just how much depth has gone into the Cessna 414 overall. I mentioned that the texturing's great, I think you can see that for yourselves. For example, here looking at the engine, the stitching there, even on the engine intake cover's done very nicely. You can see we've got the heated element on the props, and the reflections there off the spinner looking really top notch. The Chancellor is also one of the more configurable aircraft that we've seen in the sim to date. There is a whole host of options via the onboard tablet. Most of those do revolve around aircraft equipment or doors, but everything modelled very well there. Animations are great as well, the doors open and close at a reasonable speed. And just to demonstrate to you really the level of attention to detail that's gone into the Cessna 414, even the interior here of the nose baggage compartment is modelled very nicely inside. The same goes for the texturing. We have all of the appropriate placards, and really nice weathering on the aircraft as well. As far as the modelling and texturing of the aircraft goes, again it's right up there with the very best in the sim. And almost every area that I've taken the time to look at so far looks absolutely excellent. The same is very much the case with the interior of the aircraft as well, so let's head inside and we'll take a look at that. So coming now into the cockpit of the Chancellor, and again it's right up to the sorts of standards that we're expecting within Microsoft Flight Simulator. Very nicely textured, very nicely modelled, everything's very crisp, very clear, very easy to read. Textures do perhaps have that slightly grainy quality to them that we see on some Microsoft Flight Simulator add-ons, for example, most of the Just Flight offerings as well. Personally, I don't mind that, I think it looks quite nice, but it might not be to everybody's tastes. The panel modelling though is excellent. I really like the aesthetic of the cockpit as well, that really decent mix between old school avionics, steam-driven gauges, and a couple of more modern creature comforts thrown in just to make the aircraft a little bit easier to operate. We're looking at the GNS 530 version of the aircraft here. We'll be flying the GTN-XI version of the aircraft today. Really just to show off the GTN-XI once again. Worth noting though that whilst the GTN-XI is compatible with the aircraft, the same goes with the PMS 750. These units are integrated into the product, but just be advised if you are watching the review, You will need to go away and purchase the GTN-Xi separately. The same goes for the payware version of the PMS 750. Also, somewhat disappointingly, you do actually have to select a different aircraft variant from the aircraft selection menu. There's no option to reconfigure the aircraft's panel on the fly. As with the exterior model, throughout the aircraft the level of detail both in terms of the modelling and texturing is excellent, even in the more hidden away areas. And again, lots of nice little extra animations. For example, here we can open up the glove box and we've got a little flight safety guide inside. Systems modelling is generally excellent, very comprehensive. We'll obviously take more of a look at that during the flight. Really, the only systems so far that I've come across, at least in normal operation, that don't work are the circuit breakers. We are starting to see more and more aircraft coming into the sim that do have functional circuit breakers, but certainly for me it's not a big deal. Again, another nice little animation in that we can add or remove a control lock. And we aren't going to be touching on it here today as I haven't had time to cover the system myself yet, but again, just to highlight the depth of systems modelling in the aircraft. The fuel computer, for example, is fully modelled. You can actually program it accurately for the flight. Coming into the rather sizable cabin of the Cessna 414, again, very nicely modelled, very nicely textured. Excellent animations in the cabin as well, for example, the little fold-out conference table. And really, it's right at the rear of the cabin that only falls ever so slightly short of the rest of the aircraft standards. It's still very nicely done, but I presume what is supposed to be a mirrored effect there on the back looks a little bit strange, and no animations there on the rear cabinet, but that's really starting to nitpick. The 414 is without a doubt one of the most beautiful and most functional aircraft that we've seen so far in the sim. Lastly, before we get underway, just to touch on the onboard EFB, you can see that we do have a tablet provided. It looks quite nice aesthetically. From a couple of tests that I've run, it doesn't seem to be fully complete just yet, but we do have the option to add or remove the various pieces of equipment that we saw during the external walk around. In terms of the aircraft state settings, I've tried those, they don't seem to function at the moment. Systems, again we have that rudder lock that we mentioned during the external walk around. We also have the option to open up the various aircraft doors, and we also have the option to open up various maintenance panels on the aircraft, which is a really nice touch. For example, there we can remove the fuel caps, the oil door, the engine doors as well. Lastly, we have the option to add or remove the co-pilot from the external model. Slightly disappointingly, we can't also remove the pilot external model. I'm not sure why some developers do that. Next, in terms of our onboard tablet, we have what I suppose is an electronic flight computer. It gives us wind speed and component, also gives us temperatures and pressures. The only slightly strange thing here, and it could just be my lack of familiarity with inches of mercury, but it looks as though the reading there is slightly incorrect. I wonder whether or not it's not missing the first digit there and it shouldn't be 3030. Certainly the QNH given in inches of mercury should be 4 digits, so it may just be some sort of shorthand notation there, I'm not entirely sure. Lastly, we have a walk-around functionality. Basically, you can click on each of the appropriate points there and it will take you to that position on the aircraft. You can check over the various surfaces. It's not as detailed as something you'd see on the likes of an A2 aircraft, but it's still pretty well done and it's nice functionality to have. Again, that's a first in the sim. Below that we have the checklist page, and I did see that the developer had mentioned this was fully implemented but not thoroughly checked yet. I personally can't get that to work. I've tried clicking on the various checklists. So for today's flight we're just going to be using a real world paper checklist. But overall, a very nice onboard tablet there, some good functionality. It's easy to remove as well. We can just click on the camera there at the top, and if we want to bring the tablet up we can just click on the top corner there of the DV window. Anyway, that's a quick breakdown on the overall quality of the aircraft. Obviously we're going to take a look at the flight model and the systems throughout the flight. So let's get ourselves sat down and comfortable and we'll begin running through our pre-flight checks. So welcome to the rather excellent cockpit of the Flysimware Cessna 414 Chancellor. We've just got the aircraft closed up. We are now ready to run through our before start checks. So the parking brake is set, pre-flight has been completed, cabin door is closed and latched, seatbelts and shoulder harnesses are secure, emergency crossfeed shut-off is set to open, fuel selectors can go onto their respective tanks, so right main on the right and left main on the left. Cowl flaps are open, slightly strange mechanism there, it's actually pulled to close. Yaw damper is off, mixtures are set fully rich, props are set fully forward, throttles will crack about an inch for the start. The prop sync phaser is off, flight controls are full and free, switches and circuit breakers Worth noting again that the circuit breakers are not actually modelled on the aircraft, but they're checked. Magnetos switches can go on. Battery and alternator switches are on. Fuel quantities are checked. We've got 50 US gallons in each main tank on board. Gear switch and position lights. The gear is selected down. We have 3 greens. Prop blast areas have been checked. They're obviously clear. We've just got the hangar behind us. Exterior lights. We'll take the nav lights and the anti-collision light on. And we are cleared for the start. Just checking the prop areas. There's nobody around. We'll give a shout. Clear prop! And we'll close up the DV window again. We'll make sure it's locked. We are a pressurised aircraft. So we'll start the left-hand engine first. The auxiliary fuel pump can go to the low position. A little bit strange, the click spots there are in the reverse sense currently. We'll prime the engine. And we'll hit the starter. I have to say, very nice animations there on the start. The engines don't always catch as well, so there's some really decent engine modelling going. You can see there the engine not quite catching. So we'll try again.
5707, contact Denver 135.12, see ya. 3512, Sky 5707, see ya. 5 Delta Bravo, clear direct to Chile, maintain 13,000 until you're established, you're good approach steamboat.
And looks like we do have a good start now. We just fed in a little bit more throttle there to get the engine to catch. So idling at 1000 RPM, the oil pressure has come up into the green. Engine instruments look good. Of course, the oil temperature is still coming up at the moment. And just checking the suction gauge. Everything's good there. Obviously, the right-hand side is still inoperative at the moment with the right engine shut down. So we'll do the same on the right-hand engine. Auxiliary fuel pump can go to low. We'll prime on the right.
4240, empty field site. 4240, clear for the approach runway 11.
And we'll hit the starter. Again, really nice animations there. Great sounds as well. Overall, really impressed with the aircraft so far. Once again, just feeding in a little bit of throttle to coax the engine through to a good start. Oil pressure is checked. Engine instruments look good. Vacuum gauge is checked. For the after start checks, the auxiliary fuel pumps can go off. Warming the engines up around 1000 RPM, so just coming back slightly on the throttles. They've been creeping up as well as the engines have warmed up. Again, really good modelling. Avionics master can come on. Exterior lights are set. Mixtures. Come back slightly on the mixtures. We are fairly high altitude here. We'll adjust those again once we're down at the holding point and ready to carry out the run-up. You can see we're definitely running a bit rich there with the mixtures brought back. The engine's really coming up on the RPMs. So once again, power is set. Radios, we'll set those up momentarily. Brakes, we'll check on the taxi out. Flight instruments, showing a heading there of 185. And 185 on the compass. For the altimeter, we'll go to flight plan. And we want waypoint info. Aerodrome elevation 7,680 feet.
Foxtrot, so well, I got you. I guess just go switch over to my frequency 134.905, 3495.
Looks like the QNH is around 3012.
I do. Stop at 3416, it's going to maintain 12,000.
So the altimeters are set. We'll come down now to our GTN-XI units and we'll start setting those up for the flight. So firstly, just clearing our messages. Nice quick flight plan for us, but we're going to set it up on both sides, so it'll take just a little bit of time. We're tracking out from Gunnison towards the Montrose VOR, which is Mike Tango Juliet. There's Montrose. And then it'll be on towards the Grand Junction Airport, which is Kilo Golf Juliet Tango.
240, contact tower, 18.1, see ya. 18.1, meter 4240, take care.
That's it for our flight plan, nice and straightforward. As I say though, we're going to set it up on both sides.
Grand Junction tower, clear 4240, left down, 1111.
4240 Grand Junction tower, runway 11 clear one.
So we'll leave the flight plan up there on the right. We'll come to map on the left. And we can just come out on the range. There's no published departure out of Gunnison, so we're just going to be flying runway heading, more or less tracking down the valley, so keeping away from the high terrain. And we're going to be climbing up to an altitude of 14,000 feet to keep us clear of said high terrain. In terms of our taxi, we've got a wind pretty much straight down runway 24. We're obviously tracking out in that direction anyway. So we're going to make our way out towards the Alpha 6 holding point. That's going to take us a little bit of time as we backtrack, so I'll come back to you again once we're down at the holding point and ready to carry out the run-up. So we're just coming down to holding point Alpha 6 for runway 24. I have to say the aircraft taxis really nicely, one of the best taxiing aircraft that I've seen in the sim, so it's going to be interesting to see how it handles the takeoff. Anyway, we'll just swing the aircraft around, get ourselves pointed back into wind before we carry out the run-up. And again, really great sounds overall. Really enjoying the 414 so far, very impressed.
Plus 28 yard correction 3416. You're clear direct rev me, cross rev me above 1010,000, clear to ILS, runway 108.
So that's got us pointed into wind, the park brake can go on. I'm running through the before takeoff checks. Just come slightly further back on the throttles there, again back to 1000 RPM. So the before takeoff checklist, the parking brake is set, autopilot is off, electrical trim is checked, fuel quantities are checked, fuel selectors are on the main tanks, cowl flaps are open, flaps are up, trim is set for takeoff, avionics and radios. For the most part they're set, we'll just tune up the Montrose VOR. That's on a frequency of 117.1.
2 Pop Echo, contact Salt Lake Center 124.35.
And we can switch straight over to that. We're going to be tracking out on the Montrose VOR. Direct track is 260, so we'll set that on the HSI.
November 52 Papa Echo, contact Salt Lake Center 124.35.
And we'll set the heading bug as well, pretty much tracking straight out runway heading. And we have 260 set. So avionics and radios are set, flight instruments are checked. Alternate and ram dump air are both set in. Pressurization controls. So as I say, we're going to be climbing up to a altitude of 14,000 feet on flight level 140. I suppose in the States it is 14,000. So we have 14,000 set, and we have the cabin pressurization system set to pressurize. Mixtures. Just going to lean those out a little bit further. Throttles, so ready for the run up, we'll come up to 1700 RPM. We'll talk more about the mixtures later on. That does bring up an interesting point. The aircraft should have a fuel metering unit, so in actuality you shouldn't really have to adjust the mixtures for altitude. So 1700 RPM, the vacuum system is checked, annunciator panel is checked, we'll just test that. Alternators and battery, so we have all three on, and just checking our alternators and our battery voltage. Everything looking good. Props, we'll check. So it says to carry out a feathering check there on the props. I assume we just bring the prop levers back to the feather detent. That doesn't currently seem to affect the prop RPM there, so perhaps just a little bit more work needed on the modelling, or that could be user error on my part. We'll check the magnetos. So first on the left engine. On the right mag we've got about a 75 RPM drop. There's back to both. And the RPM slowly returning there to the nominal position. Same on the left. And back to both. And checking the right engine. Similar sort of drop there on the right mag. Back to both.
6 to the officer, you're welcome to stay here and monitor. I can give you traffic calls for about the next 8 minutes until I start to lose you, and then just make the switch once I can't hear anymore.
And same there on the left. So Magnetos are all on, engine instruments are checked, throttles will come back to idle. Should be idling around 1000 RPM.
Want to verify block there a little bit, that was for 6 Whiskey Yankee.
I'm not sure whether or not that's an idle check or the checklist is just referring to leaving the engines idling at 1000 RPM. We can certainly come much lower than 1000 RPM there, as you can see. I presume the checklist is just referencing idling at 1000 RPM. 1000 RPM does seem rather high otherwise. So doors and windows are closed and locked. Takeoff briefing. So once again, more or less climbing straight on runway heading, tracking outbound towards the Montrose VOR. Climb up to 14,000 feet. Parking brake can come off. The minimum oil temperature for the takeoff is 75 degrees. And we're already up through 150, so we're more than good enough there in terms of our limitations to the takeoff. We'll get ourselves lined up on runway 24. It's all clear on final.
5 Charlie Papa, Denver Center, Roger. I've had nothing worse than my shop reported. The steamboat springs altimeter 3031.
So just running through our clear for takeoff checks. The wing flaps are selected up. Transponder can go to out. Air conditioning is set off. Boost pumps can go to the low position. Lights will take the landing light on. Again, the switch is slightly in the reverse sense there, which is a little bit of a shame. I'm sure that will get fixed up, or at least I hope so. Anti-ice is off. Takeoff time is noted. And we are now ready to go. Okay, so everything's set, feet off the brakes, coming up on the power. Again, going to be interesting to see how the aircraft feels on the takeoff. It taxied very nicely. And power is set, temperatures and pressures look good. Again, the rudder response feels pretty excellent overall, I have to say. Definitely doesn't have that characteristic Microsoft Flight Simulator twitchiness to it. Coming back on the yoke. Yeah, very nice on the takeoff. Overall felt really good. Tap the brakes, the gear can come up. And we'll just pitch to climb, initially at 112 knots. Trim for that. Up through 300 feet, the flaps are up. And we'll come back to climb power, so we'll go 35 inches manifold pressure. And 2500 RPM. So far, we're really enjoying the 414. It's such a smooth aircraft. Even in terms of the engines, the throttle response really nice, the same on the prop response. Feels like a really good quality piece of software. And again, it's still currently early access, technically still a beta, but it's far better than many other products that I've tried in the sim. Products that supposedly are completely finished. Anyway, the plan is we're going to track inbound towards Montrose on the VOR, just using conventional nav. We'll then use the GTNXI to track outbound in GPS navigation, just to try both systems there. Again, climbing up to 14,000 feet. We'll set that on the altitude alerter. A little bit funny the way the system works. You have to physically pull a pin up there to set the correct altitude. Never seen that before. It says 14,000. We'll just manually fly the aircraft up to cruise altitude, and once we're up at 14,000 we'll get the autopilot in, give that a test. The after takeoff checks, the gear is up, your damper can go on. Just coming now onto our heading inbound towards Montrose. Taxi light is off. Heating and air conditioning, we'll just leave that off until we get up into the cruise. Climb power is set. Mixtures, we'll leave those for the time being. Engine instruments are checked. The oil pressure there showing a little bit high there outside of the green arc. We'll check that again later on. And pressurization. Looks like the delta PSI there is in the green arc, and the cabin altitude there climbing as well.
Foxtrot, change to advisory. You can just cancel with me on this frequency. I can hear you all the way to the ground.
Yeah, the aircraft really pleasant to fly. It's sitting very stably at our trim speed. Very smooth on the controls. Pretty stable as well. And the control response feels great. We'll be testing that a bit more later on.
And 2 Charlie Foxtrot, cancellation received. That VFR traffic's off to the right wing now in a mile. No factor. Squawk VFR. You have a nice day.
Getting a climb rate of around 1,000 feet per minute, back at 112 knots with 35 inches on manifold pressure.
Other 3460, I'll block you there, stay again.
Just going to keep an eye on those EGTs, we'll just come back slightly further on the mixture. So as I mentioned on the ground, the aircraft in reality has a fuel metering unit, so it will actually adjust the fuel rate based on altitude and therefore of course air density. I presume it's not possible to model that in the sim as it's not modelled on the 414. Certainly I know the likes of the Just Flight Turbo Arrow, there's no modelling of that. The developer does actually suggest that you just turn on the auto mixture setting within the sim, which is actually a very good idea. I hadn't really thought of that before for turbo aircraft. The only downside with that though, I don't like having to switch back and forth between various settings, and I would certainly like to have manual mixture on aircraft that require it, so it would be great if there is an option to just have that selected in the aircraft config, as for example with the modern and legacy flight model setting. That might be the way to go there. But yeah, currently you have to adjust the mixtures manually, whereas in the real aircraft it would cater for that as you climb. But really so far that's one of the only significant systems discrepancies that I've come across in the 414. And of course, to be fair to Flysimware, if it's not modelled in the sim and it's not available via the SDK, then there's not a lot they can do about that.
No, that was not for you, but you can also go and switch over to advisory now. Just cancel me this frequency. I can hear you on the ground stuff on 3460.
So we'll just keep adjusting our mixtures manually. We'll keep the EGTs there in the green band. Coming up on 1 to go.
988 Papa, contact Salt Lake Center 133.6.
As I say, once we're level, we'll trim the aircraft out and then we'll get the autopilot in. Currently showing 35 miles to run towards Montrose, doing 120 knots over the ground.
There's a Foxtrot Romeo calling Denver, say again.
Just getting a few bumps here off the hills.
For Alpha Tango Foxtrot Romeo, roger. Flight heading 220, vector climb.
And just approaching 14,000, so getting ready to level the aircraft off. Fairly sensitive in pitch, pretty typical there in Microsoft Flight Simulator. You just need to really almost just put a pressure on the elevator to actually get a response out of the aircraft. So just trimming for level flights. The atmospheric conditions not making that particularly easy at the moment. Shame it's a bit bumpy, it's otherwise an absolutely beautiful day. Using live weather here, so nice clear blue skies more or less. little bit of snow over the mountains. Anyway, that's got us pretty much trimmed out now for straight and level. We'll come back to our cruise power settings, so we're going to go for 30 inches on the manifold pressure. And we'll go for 2300 RPM.
45 Denver Center, roger. Descend to maintain flight level 200, and let me know, or what approach you're planning, I guess.
So power is set, we're nicely trimmed, the flight director can go on. We'll come into heading and out. We have out 14,000, heading, autopilot can go in. We'll see how the aircraft responds there.
345, departure trembling, VOR, heading 360.
Looks like it's going to have us levelling off at 14,100, that fairly typical Microsoft Flight Simulator bug of just levelling off 100 feet outside of what you're looking for. And in fact it's actually climbing there, so we'll go into vertical speed. Try and get ourselves back down to 14,000. I'm fairly confident this will just be using the default Sober autopilot, so as per usual, it does have to be monitored. It's going to do a few strange things along the way.
I'm sorry, I said that wrong. It's 17 for VOR. Echo Kilo Romeo VOR. Depart that on a 360 heading, and we'll set you up over Redmi.
And we'll hit out again.
Take travel Tango Foxtrot Romeo. You are clear direct cruise for consequence. Tango Charlie Sierra.
It's a little bit tricky to say whether or not it's the atmospheric conditions here or the autopilot itself. It doesn't seem to want to level us out. Still got us in a climb. We'll give it just a few moments longer, and otherwise we'll just go into vertical speed and set 0 on the climb rate. But at any rate there, it doesn't look as though the autopilot is exactly stellar. So definitely an area of the aircraft that does need some attention, but again, unfortunately all of the developers using the default Sober autopilot, really straight away you hamstring the aircraft there. And really there we're looking for a Sobo to fix things up, not the developer. So we'll just try setting vertical speed of 0 once we get to 14,000. Otherwise we'll just give up for the time being. We'll cruise our way over, try our best to maintain 14,000. So there's 0 on the climb rate. For the cruise checklist, the power is set. Cowl flaps. Cylinder head temperature is still reasonably high there, so we'll leave the cowl flaps open. Props are set, mixtures, again we'll just adjust those for KGJT.
4240 taxi, the gate monitor ground point 7. To the gate ground point 7, come here, 4240.
And we'll just go slightly rich of that. So mixtures are set, cabin altitude and differential is checked, pretty high there on the Delta PSI, but got a nice low cabin altitude. Recognition lights we don't have installed, so they're off, and the cruise checklist is complete. Still tracking inbound towards Montreux, showing 23 miles to run now, ground speed 157 knots. At 30 inches manifold pressure and 2300 RPM, that's giving us a cruise indicated airspeed of around 145 knots. And a TAS there, looks like the TAS actually calculates for us, which is a nice feature. TAS is around 160, nearly 170 knots, so pretty nippy little aircraft overall. Anyway, as I say, we're going to continue to track inbound towards the Montreux VOR. We'll stay in conventional nav for the time being, and then as we come overhead the station we're going to go into GPS nav and track outbound towards Grand Junction. As usual, we're going to head outside the aircraft. We'll take a little bit more of a look at the really nice external modelling, and I'll come back to you again as we make our approach into Grand Junction itself.
Tango Foxtrot Romeo, contact number 135.12.
3 Bravo Delta Grand Junction, running 1 close to takeoff. Proceed on course.
45, you can make the turn now, flighting 360 and change my frequency 120.47. JetBlue 45, that's a little too tight. Flighting 350 and just going to maintain 13,000. Heading altimeter 3034. 3416. We will close out this flight plan. Where are you headed on the way out? Okay. As usual, give us a call back maybe 20 minutes before you know when you're ready to depart, so we can get that ball rolling.
Five Twitter Romeo Grand Junction, going to 22 taxi for Charlie now.
Number 5 Sierra Charlie, contact number approach 126.1. Number 6 Bravo Charlie, contact number center 135.12.
Okay, so a nice quick cruising section over there. I did figure out the autopilot. It seems there's an issue there with the barrow reference, I would assume. If we set 13,700, it maintains 14,000 feet for us very nicely, so I assume that's working off 2992, which may be realistic to the real world aircraft. Anyway, just coming up on 30 DME from Grand Junction, which is our top descent point. So we'll come back into VS. We're going to aim for a vertical speed of 1,000 feet per minute. Set 10,000 on the altitude alerter.
Grand Junction ground, Vector 600, like to pick up IFR back to continue.
For some reason now the aircraft not wanting to descend there in vertical speed. Okay, just reselecting that's corrected the problem. So we've got VS minus 1,000 with 10,000 selected. Aerodrome elevation is 5,000 feet. It does seem that the avionics, currently the slight chink in the armour of the C414, it's suddenly bugged out a little bit, such that I can only select 10 degree increments there on the heading selector and the CDI bar. So there are a few issues to be fixed up, and again the aircraft is early access, so that is to be expected. It's a tiny bit of a shame, as otherwise the aircraft is actually pretty flawless, but I'm sure these sorts of issues will get fixed up in due course, and to be honest, so far it's not really been hampering my enjoyment of the aircraft. Anyway, we'll descend down to 10,000 initially, ultimately descending down to 5,000 feet, as I say. The wind is very light, it's out from the northwest. We're going to be coming in on runway 29 into Grand Junction itself. You can see we're already more or less on the heading, so we'll basically be making a straight approach.
Kilo Tango Denver, hello, flighting 360, just going to maintain 13,000, heading altimeter 3034.
The aircraft's been doing a very nice job of tracking the GPS track via the GTNXI unit.
Kilo Tango, flighting 360 heading please.
And again, overall, really good fun to fly. It does just have a couple of issues there with the automation, it seems. Anyway, definitely building up some decent speed here in the descent. We'll leave the power setting for the time being. We're up through 170 knots now, nearly approaching 180. Running through our descent and approach checks, the briefing essentially complete. As I say, we're just going to be descending down to 6,000 feet and coming in on a straight approach onto runway 29. Fuel selectors are set to main, and the fuel quantities just coming down below 40 US gallons now in each main tank. Pressurization, we'll bring that back down to sea level.
7257, turn 10 degrees right initial vector set up for runway in the straight in.
So we have sea level set, and you can see the cabin altitude there is falling, delta PSI rolling back. Altimeters are set, we have 2993 on both sides. Power is set, anti-ice not required, we've just got the pitot heat and the store heat on. Mixtures, we'll start feeding in some mixture. We're not going to go full rich for the landing though, again we'll be at reasonably high aerodrome elevation. Seatbelts and shoulder harnesses are secure, seatbacks are upright, tables are stowed, we don't have any passengers on board so that's fine anyway. Lights, we'll just take the landing light back on. Again in the reverse sense there, a little bit tricky to remember that at times. And the cowl flaps we can now close up. That's the descent and approach checklist complete. That oil PSI is still slightly on the high side there, you can see the cylinder head temperatures have rolled back. We'll come back into heading. Doesn't look like that's working for us now either, so there's definitely a few gremlins in the works with the avionics of the aircraft. Come back into VOR lock, see if that lets us go into heading. Doesn't look like it. So yeah, definitely a few issues with the aircraft in terms of the automation. So I think the best thing to do here, we're just going to take the automation out. Interestingly, my autopilot disconnect hardware button there not working. And we'll just fly things manually. We'll get rid of the flight director as well.
57, turn 10 degrees, right vectors for rev me.
Yeah, so again, that's really my major gripe with the aircraft so far. The automation, certainly not something you can rely on in its current state. It is good enough to get you from A to B and help to reduce the pilot workload, but as you've seen for yourselves, it can be a little bit more trouble than it's worth. Anyway, showing 14 miles to run. We've still got about 5,000 feet to lose. You can actually see Grand Junction already off at our 10 o'clock. We'll start coming back on the power now. Just going to increase our rate of descent. There's our altitude alert. Again, we're going to be descending further, back down to 6,000 feet. And just feeding in a little bit more mixture. The before landing checks, heater is off, lights are set as required, fuel boost pumps can go on. Prop sync is off, and we'll hold the checklist for the time being. We'll get the gear down once we turn on to final.
First Reach Air Bravo, Emerson, Roger. I'll have the lower for you here momentarily. I've got traffic below you, setting up for Eagle Vale.
Max speed for the gear is 178 knots. We can start taking the flaps at 171, so we're already well below that. And looking pretty good here in terms of our profile.
And let me know when you have the weather, what approach you like. Most aircraft are set up over Tilly for the RNM.
Overall, the aircraft is very nice to hand fly. It feels really good in roll. It's a little bit twitchy in pitch. As I said during the takeoff, it does feel fairly Microsoft Flight Simulator-esque in terms of its pitch response, but otherwise good. We're going to take this into a landing, but after we've got the aircraft shut down, we'll just carry out a couple more manoeuvres. We're going to try some engine out work, and then we'll try a stall. So that should give us a bit more of an opportunity to test out the aircraft's flight modelling.
I'll get you down here just as soon as I can, or set traffic below you.
Anyway, bring ourselves around onto runway 29. It looks like the CDI bar is working again now. We're not getting those 10-degree increments. Same for the heading bug, so I presume that's probably an issue with having the CDI driven by the GPS. Nope, seems to be working properly now, so whatever gremlin was affecting the aircraft before is now gone, it seems. There's the gear warning horn. We'll take the gear down. And we'll take a stage of flap. So we have gear down, 3 greens. Going to come all the way back to idle on the power momentarily. We're a little bit high now. And we'll just maintain our 112 knots down the approach. Take another stage of flap.
British Air Bravo, just going to maintain flight level 250. Shadow 6246, contact Denver Center 128.65.
These fuel pumps are fairly noisy, but if that's true to life of the real aircraft, that's fine by me. And again, overall sound's definitely one of the strengths of the 414. Obviously a lot of care and attention's gone into those. The aircraft sounds really good.
JetBlue 45, change to advisor, just cancel me this frequency second here on the ground.
We'll just hold off on taking final flap. We're nicely on profile now. So continuing with our before landing checks, the gear is down 3 greens, mixtures are set, autopilot is off, flaps still to come, your damper can come off, and the props, again we'll set those when we're a little bit closer in towards the runway.
245, change to advisory, cancel with me this frequency.
Aircraft naturally there seeming to want to just sit slightly below 112 knots, but we'll correct for that.
LX 624 Denver, roger, turn 10 degrees right, initial vector for the ILS to runway 10, descend and maintain 17,000, heading altimeter 3034.
So landing on 29, obviously as you can see for yourselves, we're going to be vacating out to the left.
Canada 3014, turn 10 degrees right, and descend and maintain 10,000. Right, 10,000.
And the 414 again very stable, we've got the aircraft trimmed nicely here in the approach configuration, the aircraft pretty much just sitting, making its way down final approach. Very little input required from me.
6 Whiskey Yankee, okay, I'm surprised I can hear that far out. You go ahead and contact Salt Lake now on 124.35 and you have a good day. For 4 Kilo Tango, just going to maintain 10,000.
Just coming up on 6,000, so about another 1,000 feet to aerodrome elevation. Doesn't look like we've got a PAPI on the runway, but certainly looks fine in terms of profile. We'll aim to land broadly in the touchdown zone. It doesn't really make too much difference. We've got plenty of runway exit options. So we'll take full flaps. Pitch can go back to full fine. And we have pitch full fine, undercarriage is down, flaps are set. Just trending a little bit high, we ballooned slightly there with the flap. No landing clearance required, the runway is clear. Let's check, just coming through 500. And actually we do have a PAPI there. Just a little bit tricky to spot from a distance. We've got our 2 whites, 2 reds. Windsock's looking pretty dead, doesn't feel like there's too much of a crosswind. And coming off the throttles, just holding the aircraft off. Aircraft very easy to fly in the flare. There's touchdown. And coming onto the brakes. Doesn't look like we're going to make the first left, at least not without absolutely slamming the brakes on, so we'll just roll through to the second exit. And vacating off to the left.
Go to Jet 7, you are released off a rifle. You're on the squad 4, you are released. Chemical airborne, your clearance is void, if not off in 3 minutes.
Rather beautiful scenery here at Grand Junction. Looks like the GA parking's off on our left, so we'll make our way over there, we'll get the aircraft shut down. Just coming onto the main taxiway. Get the cow flaps opened up. And the offline checks, cow flaps are open, flaps can come up. Trim tab, we'll set back to 0.
3014, set maintain 8,500.
And actually, to be fair there, I should have had a little bit more trim in for the takeoff. Didn't realise there was actually a little takeoff placard there. But overall the aircraft still felt very reasonable in terms of pitch control. Transponder can go back to standby. Interesting that's already gone back to ground. I assume the GTN XI there sensors that were on the ground. We definitely set it to out during the takeoff. Air circulation is set as required. The fuel boost pumps can go off.
Number 3 Sierra Bravo, clear direct Kelly.
And the lights. Just get ourselves slowed down here. We'll get the landing light off once again. So making our way in towards the apron.
Golf Sierra, Denver Roger, descend and maintain flight level 230. You can plan on probably going to be direct comfort for the ILS here before long.
We're going to get ourselves parked up the other side of the Kodiak.
So it works, plan on Fruel then, expect Fruel intersection in just a couple minutes here. With 3 Juliet, contact Denver 128.65.
And as I mentioned during the taxi out, actually the C414 very nice to taxi. It's actually probably the aircraft I would say I've used in the sim that feels most like a real world aircraft in terms of its taxi behaviour. We'll park ourselves out to the northeast just to enjoy those mountains as we shut down.
4 Kilo Tango, clear direct rev me, maintain 10,000 or above intel rev me, you are cleared, ILS runway 10 H.
And onto the park brake, bring the engines back to 1000 RPM. For the shutdown checks, the flight time has been noted. Accessory switches and air circulation. We'll just get the cabin depressurized. Pitot heat can go off, stall heat can go off. Landing light can go back to the off position. Mixtures can come back to idle cutoff. We'll shut down the left engine first. Nice sounds again there. Pretty decent animation. Perhaps just a slightly gravelly shutdown sound. That clicking you can hear, I believe it's the engine cooling down, the metal creaking there. It's maybe a little bit quick in terms of tempo, but still a really nice touch. That's more than you see in most aircraft. So mixtures are set to idle cutoff, magnetos can go off. Battery and alternators are off. Emergency crossfeed shutoff is closed. And that's the shutdown checklist complete. Okay, so just a couple more tests before we finish up the review. We're now airborne once again, just coming up through 9,500 feet, out towards the northwest of Grand Junction. First we're going to try a simulated engine failure, so we'll shut down the left engine. And just coming back on the mixture to do that. So the engine running down, you can see we've got 15 inches there on the manifold pressure, RPM's rolling off. Having to feed in some rudder as well now to keep the aircraft balanced. Just use the turn and slip indicator there for reference. Having to feed in some right rudder now. Okay, so the engine is dead. We've identified a left engine failure. Mixtures will leave where they are. Pitch can go to fully fine. We'll come up to full power on the live engine. And again, needing quite a bit more rudder now to keep the aircraft balanced. The rudder's fairly digital there in terms of how it feels. And you'll notice we're just coming up on our blue line there. But we do still have rudder authority. We're going to test that a little bit more in a moment's time. On the dead engine, we're going to come all the way back on the prop. And bring it into the feather position. So obviously just carrying out a feathering test to see whether or not the prop can indeed be feathered. Looks like the RPM is still rolling off. And you can see there we have successfully feathered the prop, so that's great to see. So the engine is secure. As I said, we'll test out the aircraft's handling. So currently we're at blue line, so we should have enough rudder authority to maintain directional control, but we're going to reduce our speed further and see how the aircraft responds there. So just pitching up. That's just my rudder pedals are a little bit stiff. It's quite hard to put in granular rudder input here. Okay, so we've got full right rudder. The aircraft is still balanced. And it feels like the aircraft just starting to get away from us, around 90 knots. That's full right rudder, we're drifting out to the left. So overall, it's not quite on the numbers, but a pretty nice effort, I would say. And again, great to see we can feather the engine, everything broadly responding as we'd expect. One last test, we're going to come all the way back on the power. We'll pitch up, we'll just try a stall. There's the gear warning. Just reducing that rudder input. Aircraft getting very heavy now on pitch, there's the stall warning. Still got a little bit of elevator authority. It's fully back on the stick. A little bit of buffeting, the nose wanting to drop. Overall a fairly sedate stall there, the nose is dropping, we do have a descent rate. Potentially quite reasonable. The aircraft definitely not wanting to drop a wing there or go into a spin. And lastly we're just going to try a power on stall. So coming back to 40 inches again on the live engine. Expecting we should see slightly more aggressive behaviour this time. Once again we've got full right rudder coming back on the stick. There's the stall warning. And much more aggressive now, the aircraft dropping their wing out to the left, still fully back on the controls. Going into a spin there, but the aircraft more or less self-correcting. And again, we'll recover. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed our outing in the Flysimware Cessna 414. Once again, just bear in mind the product is still in early access, it's still a beta release. Again, you are apparently getting a discount by purchasing early on, although $40 is not a small amount for an add-on aircraft, so I'm definitely going to be judging the product here as though it was a full release. Overall, almost everything I've seen about the Chancellor was really rather excellent. For saying it's an early access release, again, it's by far to a much higher standard than many other products that we see in the sim at a full stage release. I'm really pleased to see that because, again, for the price, it's not a small amount of money. But overall, I've been really impressed with Flysimware's work, and if this is not the finished version of the product, then it's very exciting to see what we'll get going forwards. I didn't purchase the Flysimware Grumman Widgeon, but I gather that the aircraft saw a lot of care and attention in terms of updates after release, so hopefully we'll see the same here with the Chancellor. Really, almost everything we looked at today I was very happy with. I think the aircraft sounds excellent, it's got some of the best sounds in the sim to date, certainly in terms of care and attention to detail, the various controls and switches, systems as well, all having very nice sounds. The same goes for the modelling and the texturing, right up there with some of the very best devs that we've currently seen in the sim. Systems wise as well, the aircraft seems to be very in depth. We've seen that the pressurisation system works, the fuel computer works. Really it's just that lack of fuel metering unit, and of course the avionics, which we'll discuss a little bit more in a moment's time, but otherwise the systems modelling, certainly very solid. I would say it's getting right up there with being a study level aircraft overall. Flight model, for the most part, very nice. The aircraft taxied very well, the takeoff felt good, the landing felt good. As I said, fairly sensitive in pitch and a little bit overly sensitive in rudder once we're actually in flight. But still very smooth to fly, very stable overall, and still well above average in terms of Microsoft Flight Simulator flight modelling. Engine out characteristics were pretty good. It was nice to see that we could feather the prop there as well, and the aircraft did behave accordingly. So the flight model, I think it has one or two issues, but I would say it's still right up there with the top few aircraft available currently in the sim. The Chancellor overall as an aircraft provides a very enjoyable, very comprehensive and very immersive experience. The one major downside at the moment, and I think that was pretty clear from the flight, the avionics definitely still need a little bit of work. The altitude hold issue that we saw, I think that might have been a user error on my part. I think that the unit obviously works off standard QNH, so 2992 or 1013 millibars. And that quite possibly is true to life of the real world unit. Some units do have the option to set the real world barrier pressure, but this one didn't seem to. However, the rest of the strange behaviour there we saw in terms of the avionics I can't really account for. For example, again, at some points, both the heading bug and the CDI bar only available in 10 degree increments. I gather that issue does affect some other add-ons as well. Personally, I've not come across that to date. Having to deselect and reselect certain autopilot modes as well, for example the VS there, And then at the end there, the heading mode on the autopilot simply not working at all. Of course, none of those are really trivial issues, so I certainly hope that they get fixed up, but I'm fairly confident they will be. It's pretty obvious that Flysimware have put a ton of care and attention into the add-on overall, so I can't see any reason why they wouldn't just jump the last couple of hurdles and really tick off all of the last remaining items that need fixing up. The rest of my negative points with the aircraft are more trivial in nature, but there are a few other things I'd like to mention. Firstly, if you do purchase the product, it only allows you to install on one computer at a time. I can see why they've done that, obviously for copyright reasons, but I always find it a little bit frustrating when a developer limits your use of the product that you've purchased. For example, I have Microsoft Flight Simulator installed on 2 machines, so I can only actually use the aircraft on one. Obviously it's personal preference whether that bothers you or not, but I thought it was certainly worthy of mention. We discussed panel configurations already. There are some really nice options there. We have the GNS 530 option, the PMS GTN 750 version, and the TDS GTN XI version. Again though, you do have to select each version from the aircraft selection menu. There's no switching around via the onboard tablet. It would have been nice to see that as an option, but the panels are very well done, so it's a minor inconvenience overall. Default views left a little bit to be desired. 2 of them were way off the mark, actually outside of the aircraft, but one of them was absolutely fine. That's what we flew with here today, so they just need touching up. Auto mixture we've discussed, not quite accurate there for an aircraft fitted with turbos, but that does seem to be a limitation of the sim as far as I'm aware. The clicking sounds on shutdown, really nice that Flysimware bothered to model the creaking there of the metal as it cools, but again a little bit overdone. Certainly the tempo of the clicking there pretty high. And lastly, again I think the aircraft sounds excellent overall, but I did notice a little bit of flanging from the external engine sounds, so they could perhaps use a little bit more work. In terms of the FPS, the aircraft did steal a few FPS from my sim. I was showing 89 FPS in the Cessna 414 versus 105 with the default Cessna 152. Not a massive drop, but if you are already struggling for frames, then certainly worthy of consideration, and you'll notice there was a couple of stutters throughout the flight here. Anyway though, overall, despite the product being in early access, a really excellent offering from Flysimware, and it shows a lot of promise for the future. If this is their standard of work from an early access product, then I'm really looking forward to seeing what the finished product has to offer. And it's great as well to see these relatively smaller developers putting out some absolutely cracking products of late, really showing the big boys how it's done. For me, I'm very happy with my purchase. I think the Cessna 414 a really excellent twin. Nice to finally have a high fidelity twin in the sim. I really hope that Flysimware do fix up the last remaining niggles with the aircraft. It's an excellent offering overall, but again, you would hope so given that the price is fairly steep. Certainly once we see that price increase with the final release, it's going to be one of the more expensive offerings in the sim to date. But once again, for me personally, at the $40 price point, I feel I've had very good value for money out of what I've received. Anyway guys, once again I do hope you enjoyed our flight. If you did, please consider giving the video a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. As ever, a huge thank you to my channel members and patrons for supporting the channel. It's very much appreciated. I hope that all of you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.